The first time Mr. Harrison noticed the extra food, he thought it was simply a mistake. The mansion's kitchen was known for its perfect planning, where every meal was prepared with exact portions for the family and staff. Nothing was ever wasted in the grand house. But for weeks, he kept seeing the same strange pattern. Every evening, after the family dinner was finished and the plates were cleared, the maid, Elena, quietly packed an additional container of freshly cooked food. She always made sure no one noticed, moving with careful, almost practiced steps. At first, it seemed harmless. After all, Elena was one of the most trusted workers in the house, known for her kindness, dedication, and warm smile that never seemed to fade. Elena had worked for the Harrison family for nearly 4 years. She rarely spoke about her personal life, yet she treated the mansion like it was her own home. She arrived before sunrise, prepared breakfast with gentle care, and stayed late into the night, cleaning the shining marble floors and spotless counters. The family often praised her cooking, saying her meals carried a comforting taste that made the house feel warm and welcoming. But despite her calm nature, there was always a quiet sadness hidden in her eyes, something Mr. Harrison had noticed but never questioned. He believed everyone carried their own struggles, and Elena never gave him a reason to doubt her honesty. One evening, while reviewing household expenses, Mr. Harrison noticed that grocery supplies were running out faster than usual. The head chef insisted everything was under control, and the staff count had not changed. Still, the numbers didn't make sense. The mystery lingered in his mind, but he chose to ignore it, trusting the loyal maid who had never caused trouble. Yet the small detail kept returning to him like an unanswered question. Why would Elena always cook extra food when there was no one else to serve? The answer began to unfold on a cold, rainy night that covered the city in heavy clouds and endless thunder. The Harrison family had attended an evening event and returned home earlier than expected because of the storm. The mansion felt unusually quiet as rain poured against the tall windows. As Mr. Harrison stepped inside, shaking water from his coat, he noticed the kitchen lights were still on. It was late, much later than Elena usually worked. Curious and slightly concerned, he walked quietly toward the kitchen, his footsteps echoing softly through the silent hallway. Through the half-open kitchen door, he saw Elena standing near the stove, carefully placing warm food into a container. Her hands moved quickly but gently, as if she was racing against time. She kept glancing toward the back entrance of the mansion, her expression filled with worry. The rain outside grew heavier, thunder rumbling loudly. Yet Elena didn't seem to notice the storm. Instead, she wrapped the container in a cloth and held it close to her chest, her eyes shining with a mix of fear and determination. Mr. Harrison stepped closer, about to call her name, when he suddenly heard a faint sound coming from outside the back door. It was soft, almost lost in the noise of the rain, but it sounded like someone or something waiting in the darkness. Elena froze, her face turning pale as she slowly reached for the door handle, unaware that her secret was only seconds away from being discovered. Elena's fingers trembled slightly as they rested on the cold metal handle of the back door. The faint sound outside came again, barely louder than the rain tapping against the stone patio. Mr. Harrison stood quietly in the hallway, hidden by the shadows, his heart beating faster as he watched the scene unfold. He had never seen Elena look so nervous. The confident and calm maid who managed the mansion kitchen with ease now looked fragile, almost frightened. She pressed the warm container of food tightly against her chest, as if it carried something far more important than a simple meal. For a moment, Elena closed her eyes, taking a slow breath as though she was gathering courage. Then she unlocked the door just slightly, opening it only enough to slip through. A cold gust of rain-filled wind rushed inside, carrying the distant sound of thunder. Mr. Harrison instinctively stepped closer, staying silent as he tried to understand what was happening. He watched as Elena quickly stepped outside, carefully shielding the container from the rain with her apron. The door remained slightly open, allowing him to hear faint whispers, though he couldn't make out clear words. The owner hesitated. He had always respected his staff's privacy, believing trust was the foundation of a well-run household. But something about Elena's behavior felt different tonight. It wasn't just about extra food anymore. There was fear in her voice and urgency in her movements. Slowly, He moved closer to the doorway, his footsteps careful against the polished marble floor. From his position, he could see Elena kneeling near the back steps, speaking softly to someone hidden in the darkness beyond the dim outdoor lights. The rain poured harder, blurring his view, but he could see Elena placing the container on the ground. She gently pushed it forward, as though offering it to someone who was hesitant to come closer. Mr. Harrison strained his eyes, trying to see who she was talking to, but the heavy shadows and rain made it impossible to identify the figure. All he could see was movement, small and slow, almost cautious. Elena spoke again, her voice filled with concern and comfort, the same gentle tone she used when serving meals to the Harrison family. As he watched, memories began forming in his mind. He recalled the many times Elena requested to leave a little later than her shift ended. She always gave simple reasons, like finishing kitchen cleaning or organizing supplies for the next day. There were also moments when she looked exhausted during morning breakfast preparation, as if she had not rested at all. He had assumed she was simply hard-working and dedicated, but now those small details started connecting in ways that troubled him. Mr. Harrison also remembered how protective Elena was whenever staff discussed leftover food or waste. She often insisted on handling the kitchen closing duties herself, politely declining help from others. The head chef had once joked that Elena guarded the pantry like it was a treasure room. At the time, everyone laughed, including Elena, but now that memory carried a different weight. Outside, Elena suddenly looked over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the doorway as if she sensed someone watching. Mr. Harrison quickly stepped back, pressing himself against the wall, his breath held tightly. He heard her whisper something urgent, followed by the soft sound of movement rushing away from the back garden. A moment later, Elena picked up the empty cloth that had wrapped the container, holding it tightly in her hands as she slowly stepped back toward the door. Her face was pale, her eyes glossy with emotion, and her hands were shaking more than before. As she reached for the door to re-enter the mansion, Mr. Harrison realized that whatever secret Elena was protecting had been going on for far longer than he ever imagined, and he had only just begun to uncover it. Elena stepped back into the kitchen, quickly locking the door behind her as the storm roared outside. She leaned against the counter for a moment, her shoulders rising and falling as she tried to steady her breathing. Mr. Harrison watched from the hallway, studying every movement carefully. He could see that Elena was trying to compose herself, wiping the rain from her face and adjusting her uniform as though nothing unusual had happened. But the nervous way she kept glancing toward the back door told a very different story. She moved toward the sink and began washing her hands, though her fingers trembled so much that she dropped the spoon into the basin. The loud clatter echoed to the quiet kitchen, making her flinch. Mr. Harrison felt a strange mixture of concern and confusion. He had always considered himself a fair employer, someone who treated his staff like extended family. The thought that Elena might be hiding something serious inside his own home made him uneasy, yet he couldn't ignore the kindness he had seen in her for years. He struggled between confronting her immediately or giving her the chance to explain on her own. As Elena dried her hands, she slowly began cleaning the counters, even though everything already looked spotless. It was clear she was trying to distract herself. Meanwhile, upstairs in the mansion, Mrs. Harrison was helping their young daughter, Lily, settle into bed. Lily had always adored Elena, often sneaking into the kitchen just to watch her cook. She loved how Elena told simple, warm stories while preparing meals, stories about kindness, patience, and helping others in quiet ways. That bond made the situation even more complicated for Mr. Harrison, who worried about how any hidden truth could affect his family. Back in the kitchen, Elena opened a small cabinet near the pantry and pulled out another empty container. She stared at it for several seconds, her expression filled with hesitation. It looked as if she was debating whether she should prepare another portion of food. The storm outside continued to grow louder, rain striking the windows with steady force. She eventually placed the container back into the cabinet, shaking her head as though she had made a difficult decision. Mr. Harrison quietly stepped away from the hallway, walking toward his study, but his mind refused to settle. He began recalling moments when Elena had asked for small advances on her salary, always promising to repay them through extra work. She never asked for much, and she always kept her word. Still, He wondered if she was supporting someone in secret or helping someone who was afraid to be seen. The possibility raised many questions about safety, trust, and responsibility within the mansion. Later that night, while reviewing security logs on his office computer, Mr. Harrison noticed something unusual. The back garden camera often showed brief moments of movement near the service gate, mostly during late evenings when Elena finished her shifts. The footage was blurry because of poor lighting, but the repeated timing raised suspicions. Whoever was coming there seemed careful, never stepping fully into the camera's view. At the same time, Elena sat alone in the staff quarters, holding her phone tightly. The screen showed several unread messages, and her eyes filled with worry as she read them again. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but she hesitated, as if she feared what she might hear on the other end. She whispered softly to herself, promising that she would find a way to keep things under control. As the storm continued through the night, both Elena and Mr. Harrison lay awake in different parts of the mansion, each carrying questions that neither was ready to ask aloud. And somewhere beyond the rain-covered garden walls, a hidden presence waited once again, depending on Elena's quiet, secret act of kindness to survive another night. The next few days passed with an uneasy silence hanging over the Harrison mansion. The storm had cleared, but the tension it left behind seemed to settle deeper into the walls of the house. Mr. Harrison tried to return to his normal routine, attending meetings and managing business calls. Yet his attention kept drifting back to Elena. He found himself watching small details he had never noticed before, how she checked the kitchen clock repeatedly in the evening, how she carefully counted food portions, and how her eyes occasionally wandered toward the back garden as if she was waiting for something. Elena, on the other hand, worked harder than ever. She prepared meals with the same warmth and dedication, smiling politely whenever the family spoke to her. Lily continued to follow her into the kitchen, asking innocent questions and laughing at Elena's gentle jokes. But beneath Elena's calm behavior, exhaustion was slowly becoming visible. Dark circles formed under her eyes, and her movements sometimes slowed as though she carried a heavy burden she could no longer hide. One afternoon, the mansion's head of security, Mr. Collins, approached Mr. Harrison with a quiet concern. He mentioned that the back service gate had been found slightly open on 2 separate mornings, even though it was supposed to remain locked at all times. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing inside the mansion had been disturbed, yet the repeated occurrence raised security questions. Mr. Harrison listened carefully, feeling a cold sense of realization creeping into his thoughts. He instructed Mr. Collins to quietly monitor the garden cameras more closely, but not alert the rest of the staff. That evening, as dinner preparations began, Elena seemed more anxious than usual. She accidentally added too much salt to a soup and quickly remade it before anyone noticed. Her hand shook slightly while chopping vegetables, and she kept glancing at her phone resting near the counter. At one point, the screen lit up a message, and her face turned pale for a brief second before she quickly locked it again. She looked toward the hallway, as if worried someone might have seen her reaction. Meanwhile, Lily noticed Elena's distraction and gently asked if she was feeling sick. Elena forced a soft smile and assured the young girl that she was fine, but her voice carried a tired tremble. Lily, sensing something was wrong, quietly told her mother later that night that Elena looked sad. Mrs. Harrison mentioned it casually to her husband, unaware of the storm of thoughts already building inside his mind. As night approached, dark clouds slowly gathered once again, bringing a heavy wind that rattled the mansion's tall windows. Mr. Harrison decided to stay awake and observe the kitchen from a distance. He sat in his study with the security monitor open, watching the blurry garden camera footage. Minutes passed slowly, each second stretching his patience and curiosity. In the kitchen, Elena finished cleaning earlier than usual. She stood near the stove, staring at the empty counter for a long time before finally opening the refrigerator and taking out several ingredients. Her movements were quicker now, filled with urgency. She began cooking another portion of warm food, her eyes constantly shifting toward the clock. Outside, the wind grew stronger, tree branches swaying wildly under the dark sky. Mr. Harrison leaned closer to the monitor when he noticed a shadow move near the service gate. The figure appeared briefly, staying just beyond the reach of the camera light. His pulse quickened as he watched Elena carefully place the freshly prepared food into a container once again. She wrapped it tightly, holding it close to her chest exactly as she had done that stormy night. Thunder echoed loudly as Elena walked toward the back door, her steps slower but filled with determination. At the same moment, Mr. Harrison rose from his chair and quietly stepped out of his study, moving toward the kitchen hallway. The mansion lights flickered slightly as the storm intensified, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Elena reached for the door handle, her hand trembling as she unlocked it. Just as she began opening the door, she suddenly paused, her body freezing as if she sensed something behind her. Slowly, she turned her head toward the hallway and saw Mr. Harrison standing there, silently watching her, while the shadow outside shifted closer to the doorway, waiting. Elena's eyes widened as she saw Mr. Harrison standing in the hallway. The color drained from her face, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The sound of thunder rolled to the mansion, and the rain began striking the windows with renewed force. Elena tightened her grip on the food container, her knuckles turning pale. Mr. Harrison stepped forward slowly, his expression calm but firm, his eyes searching her for answers she clearly wasn't ready to give. "Elena," he said quietly, his voice carrying more concern than anger. "Who is outside that door?" Elena's lips parted, but no words came out. She glanced back toward the door as another faint sound came from the other side, a soft shuffle, followed by what sounded like a weak cough. The noise was subtle, almost drowned by the storm, but it was enough to make Mr. Harrison's attention sharpen. Elena shook her head slightly, her eyes filling with panic. "Please, I can explain," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But not like this. Not right now." Mr. Harrison frowned slightly. "You've been using the mansion kitchen supplies without permission. The security gate has been left open. Someone has been coming here repeatedly." "Elena, I need to know what's going on." Before she could respond, the sound outside the door came again, this time louder and more desperate. Elena instinctively turned toward the door, her protective instincts taking over. Mr. Harrison noticed a sudden shift in her behavior, the fear in her face replaced by urgency and worry for whoever was outside. Without thinking, she reached for the handle again. "Elena, wait," he said, stepping closer. "You don't know if it's safe." Her eyes met his, filled with emotion. "I do know," she said softly. "That's why I have to help." The words hung heavily in the air. For a brief second, Mr. Harrison hesitated. Something in her voice sounded deeply sincere, filled with desperation rather than deception. But before he could decide whether to stop her, a sudden loud bang echoed from the back gate, as if the wind had slammed it open. Elena gasped, quickly unlocking the door and pulling it open just enough to look outside. Cold rain rushed in, soaking the kitchen floor. Mr. Harrison stepped beside her, finally catching a clearer view of the shadow that had remained hidden for days under the dim garden light. He could make out a small figure crouched near the steps, wrapped in an oversized, soaked hoodie. The figure seemed fragile, barely able to stand. Elena immediately stepped forward, kneeling beside them, shielding them from the rain with her own body. "Why did you come in this storm?" Elena whispered urgently, her voice filled with worry. The figure slowly lifted their head, revealing a young teenage boy, pale and exhausted, his face marked with fear and cold. Mr. Harrison's shock deepened, but before he could speak, he noticed something else that made his chest tighten. The boy clutched a small, worn backpack tightly against him, as if it contained something extremely important. "I had no choice," the boy murmured weakly. "They found where I was staying. I think they followed me." Elena's face froze, pure terror flashing across her eyes. She quickly looked toward the dark garden beyond the service gate. Mr. Harrison followed her gaze, noticing faint movement near the outer fence line, shapes barely visible through the heavy rain and darkness. It was unclear if it was just branches swaying in the storm or someone standing there, watching. "Elena, who is he?" Mr. Harrison asked slowly, his voice low but steady. Elena hesitated, her arms instinctively protecting the boy as he struggled to stay upright. Tears mixed with rain on her face as she finally whispered words that made the entire situation feel far more dangerous than Mr. Harrison had imagined. "He's my son, and if they find him here, it won't just ruin my job, it could destroy everything." The rain poured harder as Mr. Harrison stared at Elena and the trembling teenage boy clinging to her side. The words, "He's my son," echoed in his mind, colliding with everything he thought he knew about the quiet maid who had worked in his mansion for years. The boy struggled to stand, his soaked clothes clinging to his thin frame. Elena wrapped her arms around him, trying to shield him from the wind and rain, her protective instincts stronger than her fear of being discovered. Mr. Harrison stepped forward, his voice steady but serious. "Elena, bring him inside. He'll get sick standing out here." Elena looked stunned, as if she hadn't expected kindness in that moment. For a second, she hesitated, her eyes scanning the dark garden again. The faint shapes near the outer fence seemed to shift, and her breathing grew faster. Finally, she helped the boy stand, guiding him carefully into the kitchen. Mr. Harrison quickly shut and locked the back door, the loud click echoing through the tense silence. The boy shivered violently as Elena sat him near the warm stove. She grabbed towels and gently dried his hair, whispering comforting words under her breath. Mr. Harrison noticed the deep bond between them. Not just fear, but years of love, sacrifice, and protection hidden beneath Elena's quiet life as a maid. He crossed his arms, watching carefully before asking, "Who is following, Elena? And why were you hiding this?" Elena swallowed hard, her hands still trembling as she wrapped a blanket around her son. "His name is Matteo," she said softly. "Years ago, when I lost my husband, I couldn't afford a safe home. I took this job to survive, but I had to leave Matteo in a small shelter outside the city. I visited him whenever I could. Recently, the shelter closed suddenly. Some people started pressuring the children there to work illegally, small jobs that didn't feel safe. Matteo ran away when he heard they planned to move him somewhere else." Matteo lowered his eyes, gripping the blanket tightly. "I didn't want to disappear," he said weakly. "I only trusted my mother." Mr. Harrison felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. Before he could respond, a sudden loud knock echoed from the back gate, followed by voices barely heard over the storm. Elena froze, her face filled with fear. Matteo instinctively moved closer to her. Mr. Harrison walked toward the security monitor, his jaw tightening as he saw two figures standing near the service gate, trying to peer inside the property. Without hesitation, he picked up the phone and called Mr. Collins, instructing him to increase security around the mansion immediately. Within minutes, outdoor lights brightened and security staff moved toward the gate. The shadowy figures quickly backed away, disappearing into the rain-soaked darkness. Elena collapsed into a chair, tears finally falling as the immediate danger faded. Mr. Harrison turned back toward them, his expression softer but still thoughtful. "You should have told me," he said quietly. "You risked everything by hiding him, but you were trying to protect your child." Elena lowered her head, unable to speak through her emotions. Matteo reached for her hand, holding it tightly. Mr. Harrison walked toward the kitchen table, pausing before speaking again. "Matteo will stay here tonight. We'll figure out proper arrangements in the morning. No child should feel chased or afraid like this." Relief flooded Elena's face as she whispered grateful words. The storm outside slowly began to calm, the thunder fading into distant rumbles. For the first time in days, the mansion felt warm again, filled with quiet hope instead of fear. But as Mr. Harrison glanced once more at the security monitor, he noticed something that made him pause. Near the edge of the property camera, barely visible in the dim rain, one of the figures had stopped running. The person stood still for a moment, looking directly toward the mansion before slowly stepping back into the darkness, as if they now knew exactly where Matteo had found safety and might not give up so easily. The following morning arrived with a calm, golden sunrise that washed away the storm clouds from the night before. The Harrison mansion felt unusually quiet, as if the house itself was recovering from the tension it had carried. In the guest room prepared for him, Matteo sat near the window, wrapped in a clean sweater that Lily had insisted he borrow. He watched the garden carefully, still carrying a trace of fear in his eyes, but the warmth of the room and the smell of breakfast cooking downstairs slowly eased his nerves. In the kitchen, Elena moved gently between the stove and the counter, preparing breakfast like she had done every morning for years. But this time, her hands no longer trembled. There was still worry in her heart, yet it was mixed with relief she hadn't felt in a long time. Mr. Harrison entered the kitchen quietly, noticing how she paused for a moment before turning to greet him. There was a silent understanding between them now, built from truth rather than secrecy. Mr. Harrison informed her that he had spoken with local child welfare services early that morning. He assured her they were not there to take Mateo away, but to help secure proper documentation, schooling, and safe housing support. Elena's eyes filled with tears again, but these tears carried hope instead of fear. She admitted that hiding Mateo had felt like her only choice, but she had lived every day terrified that someone would discover her secret and separate them forever. Meanwhile, Mrs. Harrison and Lily sat with Mateo in the dining room. Lily spoke cheerfully, telling him about the mansion garden, her favorite books, and how Elena made the best soup in the world. Mateo listened quietly at first, but slowly he began responding, his voice growing steadier with each sentence. Mrs. Harrison noticed how protective he seemed whenever Elena walked into the room, realizing how deeply he depended on her strength. Later that afternoon, Mr. Collins reported that the suspicious individual seen near the service gate had not returned. Security footage from surrounding streets showed them leaving the neighborhood entirely. While concern did not disappear completely, it brought reassurance that the immediate danger had passed. Mr. Harrison arranged for additional lighting and upgraded cameras around the mansion, not out of fear, but out of responsibility to protect everyone living and working there. Over the next few weeks, the mansion routine slowly adjusted to its new reality. Mateo began attending a nearby school with assistance from programs Mr. Harrison personally supported. Elena continued her work in the kitchen, but she no longer stayed late in secrecy. Instead, she prepared meals proudly, sometimes packing extra food openly, this time with permission and appreciation rather than hidden worry. The extra food became a symbol of kindness, reminding everyone in the household that small acts of care could change lives in ways no one expected. One evening, as Elena placed a warm container of food on the kitchen counter, Mr. Harrison smiled gently and asked who it was for. Elena replied that she had started sending meals to a community shelter that helped families during difficult times. Mr. Harrison nodded, offering to support the effort regularly. The quiet maid who once carried a dangerous secret had unknowingly inspired a larger act of compassion within the mansion. As the sun set behind the garden trees, Mateo stood beside his mother near the kitchen doorway, watching the peaceful yard that once held fear and uncertainty. Elena placed her hand on his shoulder, grateful that her hidden struggle had led them to safety instead of loss. Mr. Harrison watched them from across the room, realizing that trust, kindness, and understanding were stronger than suspicion. And from that day forward, whenever the aroma of fresh meals filled the Harrison mansion, it carried more than just comfort. It carried a story about a mother's quiet sacrifice, a frightened boy's courage, and how one rainy night revealed that sometimes the smallest secrets hide the biggest acts of love.